I feel like I need to apologize again. This is going to be a video about politics, but we have to do this. We have to do this, you guys. We have to talk to one another about how we want to make society together. And, the UK elections were last week. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party got absolutely demolished, and Boris Johnson is now going to march the United Kingdom out of Europe. If you look more closely, what happened is a bunch of areas in the UK, working class areas that had tended to vote Labour, decided to go with the Tories, and so, as Boris Johnson even had to admit, these are like borrowed votes and borrowed seats in the Parliament, and the Conservatives had to make some concessions. It turns out that Boris Johnson is going to have to be more progressive on healthcare and education than people like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg here in the U.S. are. So we have to keep that in mind when we make any comparisons between the UK and the US, which all of the mass media, corporate media outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, they're all making this comparison between Corbyn and Bernie Sanders because they're both socialists. And the thing is about Jeremy Corbyn, he wasn't very popular in the UK. When I looked into why people were, why the UK press was smearing him as an anti-Semite, I have to grant there are some things there. He hasn't been quick enough to distance himself from elements of his own party who are problematic, to say the least. And but the thing is about Corbyn, he's an anti-imperialist. He is an anti-racist, and I don't think he's an anti-Semite, but I do think he's been forced to compromise with people because of his, more general values. So, he wants Muslim people to be respected, but he doesn't distance himself from a Muslim cleric, apparently, who referred to Jews as drinking the blood of children or something. And, of course, he's very critical of the state of Israel, particularly their military policy, their human rights violations. They're occupying Palestinian territory. It doesn't mean Israel doesn't have a right to exist, but there's clearly human rights violations underway every day in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the international community is in agreement about this. Maybe the U.S. is the lone holdout, but it's pretty clear that the Palestinians need some help. And yes, Israel is hated by other Middle Eastern countries, and it's a dicey situation. But the thing is, to be critical of the state of Israel is not to be critical of Jewish people as such, right? I'm a Jew. I'm not a citizen of Israel. Trump has passed some laws recently that are trying to conflate this difference. But the point is, Corbyn was unpopular. Bernie's not. He's the most popular senator, I think even the most popular congressperson in the country, and he's the most popular candidate running in the Democratic primary at the moment. So he doesn't have this problem that Corbyn does of being uniquely unpopular. When they polled UK voters, people who were Labour and who had decided to vote for the Tories this time, when they asked why, these voters said their number one reason, like 50% of them, was because they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. And something like 10% of them said it's because they didn't like the Labour manifesto, the economic policies to prop up the NHS, reinvest in their universal healthcare system, and reinvest in education, reinvest in infrastructure and public transit and all these things. People like that. They didn't like Corbyn. Now here in the U.S., yeah, Bernie's really popular. People think he's authentic, he's honest. People know he's on their side. Working people, poor people, average Americans know that Bernie's on their side. He's not working for the billionaires and corporations that donate to all of the other candidates. So we have to be careful making a comparison, even though it's tempting, because, of course, Brexit in 2015 certainly foreshadowed Trump's election here in the US in 2016. But I think, I was watching Rebel Wisdom's most recent video about why the left keeps losing, and I really appreciate the way they're bringing integral theory and spiral dynamics as understanding of the evolution of consciousness through different mutations. Bringing that lens to bear on our political situation is really helpful. Taking a psychological and spiritual perspective on the political discourse is really helpful. I think there's a tendency I've noticed in some of Rebel Wisdom's conversations to peg the left as being uniquely tribalistic, or that it's the left that has this problem of othering. And I just want to point out that it's also present on the right. There's plenty of actual anti-Semitism and bigotry and homophobia and sexism on that side of the aisle. And so what we're dealing with are human tendencies, and identity politics now spans the political spectrum, right? It's not just people on the left that do it. They're white supremacists on the right that do it. So I think we need to stop, if we're on the left, and I can see why maybe we want to critique our own to better our game, to better the game of our team, but ultimately we need to, I think, come up with we need to update our political spectrum, right? We're thinking in 18th century terms when we have 21st century problems to solve. So there are political realignments underway, right, as we speak. I think in the United States, the two major parties, I call them the corporate duopoly, they've been holding steady more or less at 25 or 30% each of the U.S. population as people who think of themselves as members of those parties. But the majority already are independents, I would say, and more people don't identify with either of these parties. And Bernie, as an independent, though he is running in the Democratic primary because third parties are really unfairly kept out of the process, I think Bernie represents this realignment. He really upsets establishment Democrats because he is, as they're always complaining, not a Democrat, in the sense that the Democratic Party has taxed far to the right since the 90s, when Bill Clinton basically transformed the Democratic Party into a right-wing party, a conservative party. He reformed welfare. He put a bunch of black people in jail. I know there was a push for universal health care, but I mean, it's not like if you go back a few decades and look at some Republicans that they didn't see the value of things like Medicare and Social Security. So the Democrats became the sane conservatives, and the Republican Party spiraled off into evangelical, apocalyptic, an evangelical apocalyptic nightmare. And we're seeing the fallout of that now. So it's like, yes, I would rather have a Democrat in the White House than a Republican, of course. And yes, I want Trump out of office. But Trump is a symptom. Trump is not the cause. Going back to the way things were before Trump is not a solution, right? And Bernie represents a new direction for this country. New at least, in the last 80 years or so. It's taking us back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vision of America. It's giving young people and workers and the planet a new deal. Because Gaia knows we need a new deal. We need a new realignment between labor and capital. I don't think Bernie's saying we need to eliminate the market. That is impossible and stupid, right? But the market is one element in the social matrix, one means through which the human being engages itself and the earth in this process of sociogenesis. There's also, besides just the market, There's the sphere of culture. There's the sphere of science. There's the sphere of spirituality and religion. And, we need to give these other spheres of human existence their due and not let the market dominate. And there's a way in which Christianity, evangelical Christianity in the United States, has totally become this sort of capitalist apologia, and that, it's not the religion of Jesus, that's for sure. And so there's a need, I think, to rediscover the place of religion in society and rediscover the place of the arts, rediscover the place of philosophy and public discourse and dialogue, to check the power of the market, because we've just given everything over to this logic of exchange and this logic of exploitation, this logic of accumulation, and it's killing everything. It's killing everything. So we don't need to eliminate it, but we need to realign ourselves with it so that it serves humanity and the earth, and it's not seen as an end in itself. So the profit is not seen as an end in itself. The end, the purpose of our existence is not to make money. Money is a symbol, money is a means of communication, and we have a communication disorder on our hands. So I think Bernie Sanders represents our best chance, our next step toward the sort of society, the sort of ecological civilization that I would like to see us living within. So let's make it happen.